What is history for? This is what Elaine de Botton thinks.
In the future, we should treat history a bit like a doctor treats a medicine cabinet. Before diving into history, we'd first have to work out what was wrong with us, what we were lacking in the here and now. We might be diagnosed for a lack of courage or a spoilt nature or a hesitation about whether to marry, and we should be prescribed history accordingly. For their part, historians themselves should get clearer about what problems in the present they're trying to solve. They should explicitly aim to tell us things about the past that can help us with issues of today.
What he says sounds all fine and reasonable, but if you were to pull back the lid, we might just find a sinister thinking process. Subconsciously, I followed Elaine de Botton's advice and had an entire video planned on what our modern leaders can learn from historical leadership and yada yada yada. But I really struggled to make that video, because it wasn't really the video I wanted to make. To me, history is a living organism. It is not something which exists to extract resources from, like we're already doing to nature, which we are conveniently calling the environment. I'm not reading about the Romans to find useful tips and tricks to apply to my daily life. I'm reading about the Romans because I am in awe of their civilization, the way they thought, their strange paradoxes, to commune with the phantoms of their lost world. This is why I love history, to be mesmerized and reflect on the ruins of once great civilizations. As Keats echoed, "And little town, thy streets forevermore will silent be, and not a soul to tell why thou art desolate can e'er return." I think, above all, before studying all the tedious dates, economic programs, and potential utilities, we must first reflect on the strange humanity which has been lost to time. Today we will reflect on the strange, inspiring humanity of Abd al-Qadir. He was a warrior, a scholar, a poet, but above all, deeply devoted to spiritual contemplation and Sufism. For 14 years, he held the might of colonial France at bay and defended his native Algeria against impossible odds. Desert Hawk, a biography of his tumultuous life, is one of the most beautiful historical books I've ever read. It is rich with fleeting images of a forgotten Oriental world. It succeeds in combining the historical facts with thoughtful, sometimes even poetic, reflections. In my opinion, the best histories blend these two together, and it is what I hope to achieve today. Abd al-Qadir was born on September 8, 1808, to his father Mahid ad-Din and one of his 4 wives, Zora. Abd al-Qadir's father was an important religious figure known as a marabut, a sort of priest or high-ranking bishop in the Islamic world. Marabuts were at the head of religious institutions called zawiyas, which is basically an Islamic monastery. Not only was Abd al-Qadir trained in theology, mathematics, astronomy, and Greek philosophy, but also in horsemanship, equestrian science, and the arts of war, excelling in both body and mind. He was a clever student and had learned the Quran by heart by the age of 12. All of this education and bodily rigor was mediated through a spiritual framework. Allah came before all. Religion was definitely the most important part of Abd al-Qadir's life. Throughout the struggle against the French, he would find solace and encouragement through his faith. In many ways, Abd al-Qadir was destined to be a leader of men. Being the son of such an esteemed marabout as Mahid ad-Din would mean he would inherit his father's position as the leader of the Zawiya, and he never really imagined a life beyond religion and scholarship. But everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked, aka colonial France. I will not go into meandering details about the complicated web of geopolitics, economics, and nationalism which inspired the invasion. All you need to know for this video is that a French representative got slapped with a fly whisk by the Ottoman ruler of Algiers, called Hussein, and when he refused to apologize, France responded with a full-scale invasion of the city. France made short work out of this old infamous pirate capital and will occupy the city until Algerian independence in 1962. Hussein fled the city. A large cabin had been specially constructed in the center of the ship to accommodate the fallen monarch and his women. Carpenters had been working against time to get this ready. It may have been accidentally that they had left a hole in one of the partitions, through which, as the ship sailed out of the harbor, leering French sailors took turns to study the unveiled beauties of the day's harem. For the native Algerians, the situation was acceptable for as long as France stayed around the coastal towns and did not expand further into the mainland. But France probably is still a bit hungover from the spirits of Napoleon. It just couldn't help itself. Local Algerian rulers were carelessly swapped around and replaced with those sympathetic to France, causing disorder, looting, and lawlessness. The native Algerians were now forced to respond. Abd al-Qadir's father, Mahid ad-Din, had already been Paul revering his way through the native tribes, urging the Algerians to unite against the Christian infidels in a holy war. A council of chiefs was assembled, and none other than Mahdi ad-Din was elected as the leader of the jihad. But the humble marabout, aging and wearied, abdicated in favor of his fierce, energized 24-year-old son, Abd al-Qadir, now newly christened as the Emir. And thus the military career of one of history's noblest commanders began. Abd al-Qadir was not a man in pursuit of his own glory or elevation. He simply desired to carry out the holy mission which he felt destined to accomplish. The ends did not justify the means. Political ambitions were often sacrificed when they came in conflict with his own morals. He released French prisoners if he could not feed them, and gave rewards for French prisoners taken alive. In fact, he was so generous to his captives that 2 former French prisoners, after the war, begged to be his servants. He sold large quantities of his own possessions when funds were running dry, dressed in a simple white burnous, and made no obscene displays of his wealth. He neither eats, drinks, nor clothes himself, but as his religion allows. He shows no indulgence towards the man who commits a serious offense and would punish his own son under the same circumstances. After the French broke a hastily secured peace treaty, the emir would win his first major battle in the marshes of the Makta. The French retaliated by setting their sights on their emir's base of operations, Mascara, which resulted in native Algerians sacking the town before the French got their hands on it. Aren't they generous? The sack was brutal. Within the city, which but a few days before had been the proud and smiling capital of the emir's dominions, there remained little now but desolation and chaos. Abd al-Qadir was powerless to stop the French advance, and was defeated in battle, allowing the French to easily access the city. And with defeat there always came the routine mass desertions of his tribesmen. He could do nothing but return home and live to fight another day. But not even his own tribe, the Hachem, supported him now. They ransacked his belongings and stole the gilded parasol, which was a symbol of his royal authority. This was a low point for the usually indomitable holy warrior. For a people who could not unite, he lamented, who crumbled at the first sign of adversity, who vanished at the rumor of defeat, there could be no real victory and no future. He decided to give it all up and live in exile with his family in Morocco. But something strange happened. Not a day later, the various chiefs who had abandoned him, his own tribe who had humiliated and mocked him, were now stricken with a guilty conscience. They begged Abd al-Qadir to lead them again. At first he was adamant. He had chosen exile. He said he could no longer lead a people who do not wish to be led. Then they fell at his feet, began kissing his hand, the hem of his burnous. The very men who had insulted him the most were the most insistent now. El Equari, Aga of the Hachem, arrived with the royal parasol and implored Abd al-Qadir to take it back. He would continue his struggle against the Christians. Battle after battle, siege after siege, Abd al-Qadir would keep the colonial superpower on her toes. The Emir and the French general Bugeaud negotiated another temporary peace treaty. Out of all the French generals, he is in my opinion the most charismatic, but also the most instrumental in Abd al-Qadir's downfall. Bugeaud had imposed a system of military organization more suited to the North African environment. Heavy, cumbersome military equipment would be sacrificed for freedom of movement, an open-colored, sun-friendly military uniform would be issued, and there would be no more skeleton garrisons vulnerable to Arab raiding parties. Instead, the army would concentrate their activity in a couple of strongholds and from these march out in unified columns. He selected the best soldiers for command and installed these in the strongholds, spread throughout the country. No place was safe. Abd al-Qadir was forced to abandon his best, most fortified cities and let them fall into the hands of his enemies. The various Algerian tribes had it even worse. They were in a lose-lose situation. If they supported the superior French military, they would betray their religion, their country, and suffer punitive raids from Abd al-Qadir. If they stood with him, their homes and villages would be destroyed by the French. The now dwindling supporters of the Emir congregated in his nomadic tent community called Ashmala. His former friend and ally, Leon Rocher, now worked for Bugeaud and tried to convince his former master to surrender. But the Emir still had some cards to play. Military support from the Moroccan Sultan would reinvigorate his army, and just one victory would have the tribes rebelling against their European overlords again. When the French encroached on the Sultan's territory, Abd al-Qadir's wishes came true. Diplomacy had failed, war with the Moors was inevitable. In the greatest historical parallel of King Robert's 5-1 monologue,
which is the bigger number, 5 or 1?
5.
5. 1. One army, a real army, united behind one leader with one purpose.
Bugeaud's little army, outnumbered 10-1, completely routed the Sultan's massive legions. Now even Abd al-Qadir had to admit it was only a matter of time before he would be defeated. Algeria was under the yoke of France. He had lost Ishmala to a surprise French raid. 100,000 soldiers were combing through the country looking for him, and with no hope of Moorish assistance, surrender or suicidal last stand were the only options. To end the sufferings of his countrymen, he chose the former. And on the morning of December 23, 1846, Abd al-Qadir surrendered to the French army, and the 15-year struggle was over. Since he had waged a war in the name of God, he reasoned that if God wanted him to win, he surely would have by now. The French promised he could live freely in exile on the condition he would never return to Algeria. However, it took 5 years of imprisonment for them to fulfill this promise. In these trying times, the Emir stayed resilient and cheerful for his family, who had chosen to share the burden of captivity with him. Even towards his captives, he showed no outward hostility. A legend arose of the Emir's humility and kindness. He gained many supporters and allies advocating for his release. Eventually, through the influence of Napoleon III, the Crown Prince of France, Abd al-Qadir was released. For a brief period, Abd al-Qadir was the darling of Parisian high society. Everyone wanted to meet this mysterious desert chief. Blunt recounts, quite poetically, in a passage about his farewell party, Then the dragoons and lancers maneuvered, the guns roared, and the cavalry charged in line. At the sound of the thundering hooves, what memories, what visions of half-forgotten battles must have surged up in Abd al-Qadir's mind. Once again he seemed to see the fertile plains of Algeria and the white burnasses of his Arabs, to hear the clash of saber against saber, the wild cries of the victors, the groans of the dying. He awoke from this dream to receive the congratulations of the generals. He was no longer the Sultan of the Arabs, he was the fallen leader, the unbound captive, the honored guest of France. After saying his farewells to his friends in France, he was eventually given a residence in Damascus with a quite generous pension by his liberator Napoleon III. Here he lived in peace, devoting himself to the education of his sons, charity for the poor, and of course, religious practices. However, there was one more episode in his dramatic life worthy of mention. First, you'll need a bit of context. In Syria, there were two neighboring tribes at war with each other. These were the Maronites and the Druses. The Maronites were a Christian sect, and the Druses were a mix between Islamic and pagan peoples. This conflict ignited a series of Christian massacres against Maronites in Lebanon, which soon threatened to spread to Damascus. Abd al-Qadir got wind of the encroaching danger and urged the French consul Lanous to notify military authorities. However, the Turkish Pasha Ahmed, ruler of Damascus, had designs to massacre all the Christians in the city and falsely reassured French military authorities everything was under control. Abd al-Qadir's warning fell on deaf ears, and soon the city erupted into an orgy of horrendous massacres against the Christians. The helpless Christian minority stood no chance against the swelling Muslim mob coming from within and beyond the city walls. Abd al-Qadir assembled a small militia of 300 loyal veteran warriors and made his home a fortified safe haven for the Christians. And when the mob came shouting for him, "Give us the Christians," he replied, "The Christians? As long as a single one of my brave soldiers still lives, you shall not have them. The Christians are my guest, murderers of women and children, sons of iniquity. Come try and take them, and you will see how the soldiers of Abd al-Qadir can fight." Then turning to his men, "I swear before God that we are about to fight for a cause as sacred as that for which we have fought together of old. Kara Mohammed, my horse, my arms." The spineless mob of butchers slunk away in the face of an enemy who could actually fight back. Abd al-Qadir saved 12,000 men, women, and children that day, and gained international acclaim for his heroic actions. Abraham Lincoln even gave him some good old American guns as a gift. Abd al-Qadir would continue his correspondence with his old friends in France, and would spend his days in the manner mentioned before. In old age, he desired more religious seclusion in preparation for life after death. He died of illness on the 25th of May, 1883. Much more can be said on Abd al-Qadir's life, especially about his military campaigns, poetry, and scholarship, but I'll stop myself here.